Chapter 2. Brewing Tensions. Tension in the potions classroom was palpable, as thick as the haze of steam wafting from bubbling cauldrons. Hermione stood at her workstation, measuring ingredients for Amohensia with precision. Her movements were methodical, focused, as if by concentrating on the potion she could block out the presence of Draco Malfoy across from her. Draco stood stiffly, his posture tense as he flipped through his potions textbook. His hands lingered on the edge of the desk, fidgeting slightly. "Granger, he started, but the words seemed to falter, hanging awkwardly in the air. Hermione's head snapped up, her expression sharp. "What?" "I can do the rest," he said quickly, holding up the book like a makeshift shield. "You know, team playing and all." Hermione hesitated. She didn't want to spend more time around him than absolutely necessary, but she wasn't about to jeopardize the quality of their potion. The thought of another project with Malfoy was already testing her patience. "Fine," she said shortly. "You can prepare the rose thorns. Just make sure they're powdered evenly." Draco nodded, almost too quickly. "Right, on it." As the two worked in silence, Hermione found herself hyper-aware of his every movement, the steady scrape of the mortar and pestle, the deliberate clink of glassware. Every so often she'd glance his way, only to catch him looking down at his work, avoiding her gaze. She shook her head, forcing herself to focus on the cauldron in front of her. The sooner this was over, the better. The potion's pearly sheen began to shimmer as Hermione stirred it one final time. She caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye and glanced at Draco. He seemed momentarily caught by the scent, his expression softening. Hermione frowned. "What do you smell?" Draco blinked, as though startled by the question. For a moment he looked as if he might deflect, but then he met her gaze. "Home," he murmured quietly, or what it could have been. The words lingered in the air, raw and unexpected. Hermione didn't know how to respond, so she didn't. Instead, she focused on bottling the potion, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Anything to avoid thinking too hard about the strange, vulnerable edge to Malfoy's voice. Professor Snape's arrival broke the silence, his robes billowing as he approached their workstation. "Let's see if your combined efforts amount to anything worthwhile," he drawled, his dark eyes flicking between them. Hermione handed him the vial, sealed and labelled with precise handwriting. Snape examined it closely, his expression unreadable as he held it up to the light. "Acceptable," he said at last. "For once, Miss Granger and Mr. Malfoy, you appear to have produced something of value. Bottle it and place it on my desk." Hermione nodded curtly, handing the vial to Draco. She began packing her bag, eager to leave. Harry and Ron were working a few tables away, and the sight of them, the easy camaraderie they shared, was a stark reminder of how much she longed to escape this forced partnership. Just as she slung her satchel over her shoulder, a loud bang shattered the relative quiet of the room. Hermione turned in time to see Seamus Finnegan's cauldron erupt, a geyser of potion shooting into the air. The bright, steaming liquid arced toward her, and before she could react, it splashed across her robes. A sharp, searing pain tore through her as the potion soaked into the fabric, blistering her skin beneath. Hermione staggered back, her hand clutching the edge of the table for support. The world seemed to tilt around her as the pain intensified. Her words were meant to be reassuring, but the tightness in her voice betrayed her pain. Harry frowned, clearly unconvinced, while Ron looked ready to march Seamus to the headmaster's office. This day couldn't get any stranger. First Malfoy, now this. Right now, she needed to get to Madame Pomfrey, but she didn't want her friends to worry about her. Hermione reached out, trying to calm them. "Don't touch me," she added hurriedly. "Just grab my bag," Hermione managed, her voice wavering but firm. She tried to straighten, biting back a grimace. "I'll live." Her words were meant to be reassuring, but the tightness in her voice betrayed her pain. Harry frowned, clearly unconvinced. while Ron looked ready to march Seamus to the headmaster's office. Harry went to grab her, but she had stopped him with a raise of her hand. "Don't touch me," she added hurriedly. "Just grab my bag." Ron moved quickly, scooping up her satchel from the table, which she was thankful for. Draco stood a few steps away, his expression unreadable, though his pale knuckles clenched against the edge of the desk betrayed a quiet anger. She wasn't fine, and it was blatantly obvious to anyone with eyes. The fact that she would brush off her pain, just to save face in front of her friends, ignited something sharp and unfamiliar in him. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, remaining rooted in place. Harry shot Draco a glare that was nothing short of venomous before turning back to Hermione. "We'll get you to the hospital wing," he said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Hermione nodded faintly, her breaths shallow. Each step was agony, but she let them guide her toward the door. The last thing she saw as they left was Draco, still frozen in place, his eyes following her retreating figure with a flicker of something almost imperceptible. Concern, frustration, or perhaps both. The hospital wing was silent, save for the soft hum of Madame Pomfrey's spells and the occasional rustle of linens. Hermione lay on the narrow cot, her arms exposed to the cool air as the nurse worked diligently. A lavender-scented salve glistened on her blistered skin, the soothing magic easing the worst of the pain but leaving a dull ache in its wake. "You'll be fine," Madame Pomfrey said briskly. Her tone clicked but not unkind. "The burns aren't too deep, though I'll need to keep you here overnight for observation. No arguing." She knew better than to argue with the women, so she didn't argue back and reassured her. "I wasn't going to," Hermione replied, though her voice lacked its usual vigor. She was too sore to protest, the weight of the day pressing down on her like a heavy cloak. "Good. I will be back to check on you later." And with that the healer headed off in the direction of the other students. Harry and Ron stood at the foot of her cot, their expressions a mixture of worry and frustration. Ron's arms were crossed, his face set in a scowl. Harry, on the other hand, kept glancing between Hermione and Madame Pomfrey as the women walked away. "Honestly," Hermione said after a moment, her tone soft but firm, "I'm fine. I'll live. There's no need for all this fuss." Ron's scowl deepened. "No need? Hermione, you were practically on fire back there. Your skin was—" He broke off, his voice rising. "And you're acting like it's nothing." Harry nodded in agreement, his green eyes sharp with concern. "Ron's right. You don't have to downplay this, Hermione. We're your friends. Let us worry about you for once." Hermione opened her mouth to respond, to deflect their concern with logic or a witty remark, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. She hated being the center of attention, especially when it came to her own vulnerabilities. It was easier to focus on solutions, on moving forward, than to dwell on the fact that her friends were right. She wasn't fine. Not entirely. Outside the hospital wing, Draco Malfoy leaned against the cold stone wall, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. He hadn't planned to come here. In fact, he'd nearly made it to the dungeons before something, a nagging voice in the back of his mind, had pulled him back. He told himself it was curiosity. He just wanted to make sure she wasn't too hurt. That was all. But as he stood there, listening to her voice through the crack in the door, something inside him twisted. "I'm fine," she had said. Draco's jaw clenched. She clearly wasn't fine. He'd seen the burns himself, the way she had staggered out of the classroom, refusing anyone's help, and yet here she was, brushing it all off like it didn't matter. What frustrated him most was that he understood it. He recognized that stubborn need to appear strong, to push people away before they could push you first. He had lived that way for years, building walls so high even he wasn't sure how to tear them down. But seeing it in her, it was different. Unsettling. He didn't want her to keep people out, to keep him out. The thought startled him. Since when had he cared about being let in? But he couldn't deny the small flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Envy, admiration, regret. He wanted her trust, her friendship, even if he didn't deserve it. He wasn't sure where the impulse came from, but it was there, unbidden and undeniable. Inside, Madame Pomfrey finally stepped back, wiping her hands on her apron. "That should do for now. Rest, Miss Granger. Your friends can visit tomorrow." Ron opened his mouth to protest, but a single look from the nurse silenced him. Grumbling under his breath, he grabbed Hermione's satchel and slung it over his shoulder. Harry hesitated, his eyes lingering on Hermione. "We'll be back first thing," he promised. Hermione offered a small, tired smile. "I'll be here." As they left, the hospital wing grew quiet. The dim light of the lanterns cast soft shadows on the walls, and Hermione stared at the ceiling, her thoughts drifting. She replayed the day's events in her mind, the explosion, the pain, the chaos, and, inexplicably, the fleeting look she had caught on Draco's face in the aftermath. He hadn't spoken, hadn't moved, but something in his eyes had stayed with her, a flicker of emotion she couldn't quite place. Outside the wing, Draco pushed himself off the wall and began to walk away. His footsteps echoed in the empty corridor, each step heavy with unspoken thoughts. He didn't know what he would say to her, if anything, but for the first time he realized he wanted to try. Whether she would let him was another matter entirely.